All right, here we are. We're beginning, it looks like. There we are. We're going. I was looking at the clock. It hadn't started yet. Hello. This is the last lecture for chapters 14 through 17. We'll finish the packet today. And then Thursday at 2 p.m., there'll be a review time from 2 to 3. If you care to join or if you have questions about the test, you should have a link for that. I sent you in Google Classroom earlier this week. And then on Friday, we'll test. So if you get your packets out here and go to this page, we ended yesterday with John Tyler's legacy in the 28th state right here on the packet. So we are going to go here to James K. Polk, James K. Polk's vision on manifest destiny. So find that spot on your packet and we'll begin. Remember, manifest destiny was the belief here in the United States that it was God's will that the United States be a coast-to-coast nation from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And now with Texas being annexed and part of the Union, if you just look at a map, we don't have a long way to go to achieve that goal. But standing in the way, there are territories that belong to Mexico, what is currently present-day California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, part of Colorado, and half in New Mexico. This is all territory that belonged to Mexico. Remember, Mexico had gained its independence from Spain in 1821. So in 1846, Mexico as a country is only 25 years old. And they know what the vision of the United States is in regards to wanting manifest destiny. And there's a legitimate fear on their part there that the United States might forcibly try and take it from them. And that's not our intentions. James K. Polk, if you look at the second topic there, makes overtures to Mexico. They're a young fledgling country. They do have some financial issues. And so the Polk administration offers Mexico $30 million for this territory that I just listed above, what is now the southwestern United States. So the overture was $30 million to purchase what is now the southwestern United States from Mexico. And this is rebuffed by Mexico. In fact, they see it as an insult. And even today, if you look at Mexican indignation and resentment of the United States, what's taught in their schools even to this day, this was just an act of imperialism on the part of the United States, and that it was a land grab. We were going to steal this land from Mexico in whatever way we could to achieve manifest destiny. But that's not the case. Again, you have to look at the facts and look at history. I'm not doing a flag waving, beating the drum here, but we look at what happened. So we're done with that page. Go to the last page that you have there, and at the top it should say the Oregon Treaty of 1846. So we're on that page, and that's our last page. The Webster-Ashburton Treaty earlier had secured the 49th parallel as the border between English Canada and the United States through the Louisiana Territory to the foothills of the Rockies. But then there was the Oregon Territory, which had been shared or co-opted by both England and the United States. And so what this treaty does, the Oregon Treaty of 1846, extends that 49th parallel line all the way to the Pacific Ocean, except when you get to Vancouver. England wanted all of Vancouver Island in their territory. So that's, if you look at the border of the United States, you'll see it 49th parallel all the way across. And then when it gets to the ocean, it dips down like that so that England could have all of Vancouver Island in their territory. So by 1846, what we've done now, the Webster-Ashburton Treaty had set the disputed territory of Maine border and the border between Canada and the United States through the Louisiana Territory. And now with this treaty of 1846, the northern border of the United States for the lower 48 contiguous states between Canada and the United States is set, and it is the way that it is today. Later on, when the United States purchases Alaska from Russia, we'll also set that border between Alaska and what is the Yukon, the British Columbia, and the Northwest Territories. That'll be set later on. Now, the next topic there that you see, the Rio Grande versus the Nueces River. If you remember, when Santa Ana, in fact, April 21st, today, well, I'm taping this on April 21st, but today is the 184th anniversary Is that correct? Yes, the 184th anniversary of the Battle of San Jacinto. And when you're watching this tomorrow, which will be Wednesday for your April 22nd, that'll be the 184th anniversary of Santa Anna being found in a private's uniform and brought before Sam Houston, who's sitting under a tree, having been wounded in the foot on the battle the previous day. And if you remember that they wanted to hang him or shoot him or kill him, and Sam Houston cut a deal with Santa Anna and said, "You want your life, I want Texas." And Santa Anna will agree to this and sign the Treaty of Velasco, which set the border in the Treaty of Velasco as the Rio Grande was the border between Mexico and the new Republic of Texas. After Santa Anna went on kind of a tour as a prisoner, he ended up meeting Andrew Jackson in Washington, D.C. He goes back to Mexico and says, remember, he says, "They had a gun to my head." And then the Nueces River is the border. The independence of Texas was never disputed, if you remember. It was where the border was. Well, the Republic of Texas and Mexico dispute this for 9 years between 1836 and 1845. But when Texas is annexed, Mexico threatens the United States and says the Nueces River is the border between the United States and Mexico. The United States government says, "No, we recognize the Rio Grande via the Treaty of Velasco, 1837, as the border." And they said, well, that deal was cut with Santa Anna, and he's no longer here. In fact, Santa Anna has been kicked out and is living in exile in Cuba, and so we don't recognize the treaty. And the United States response was, "That's not our problem. The border is the Rio Grande." And so when people talk about the United States and active imperialism and a land grab and stealing the southwestern United States, and Mexico agreed to abide by the treaty that it signed by Santa Anna, who was the emperor of Mexico at that time, we wouldn't have had a war with Mexico, because it's this is what sparks the war with Mexico, this border dispute of the Nueces River and the Rio Grande River. If you look at a map of Texas, you'll see the Rio Grande, and just north of the Rio, about 80 miles, you'll see the Nueces River. And it's that strip of land there that's disputed between Mexico and the United States. So it's Mexico that pushes the button here, and they threaten the United States. They said if any U.S. troops cross the Nueces River, that Mexico would see that as an act of war. And President Polk responds, "Well, we're going to send U.S. troops to the Rio Grande, and in response to your threat, if any Mexican troops cross the Rio Grande, we'll see that as an act of war." And sure enough, Zachary Taylor with 3,000 troops is sent down to what is now around Brownsville, Texas, at the very bottom of the tip of Texas, and there's a fight. And Mexican troops cross the river, troops are killed on both sides, and you have then a declaration of war. Now, there's going to be some dispute here with some people. In fact, a young congressman in Congress from 1846 to 48, Abraham Lincoln, challenges the federal government, says, "I dare you to show me one drop of American blood on American soil." Because Mexico said U.S. troops crossed the Rio Grande into Mexico. And Zachary Taylor Jr. said, "No, they crossed the Rio Grande and attacked us," which makes sense because that was Mexico's threat, that if you cross the Nueces, we're going to see that as attack, and war is sparked. Now, you're going to have some things here. James K. Polk is going to go to Congress and get a declaration of war on Mexico. And look at your next topic there. You're going to see Santa Anna, our friend from the Texas Revolution, our friend who surrendered or was captured in a private uniform at San Jacinto 184 years ago today, April 22nd. And he's living in exile in Cuba, and he wants to be back in power. And so he approaches the U.S. government, the Polk administration, and says, "If you'll help me go back and get reinstated and seize power back in Mexico, we can stop this war. There won't be a war. And I'll agree to your terms of, you want to buy that land for $30 million? I'll sell it to you for $30 million. And then we don't have a war." And so the Polk administration agrees to this, and Santa Anna comes back to Mexico. But what Santa Anna does is he double crosses the United States, making him a villain. Everybody loves a villain and everybody loves a heel to hoot and holler against, and this is going to be Santa Anna. When Santa Anna gets back to Mexico, he seizes power and rallies the people of Mexico and says, it's me, your rightful emperor, that will prevent the United States from taking this territory by force, and I'll lead us to victory. Well, with war declared, you see the next topic there is Zachary Taylor. Zachary Taylor has crossed the Rio Grande with war, is now in northern Mexico. he had about 12 to 13,000 troops by this point. Well, James K. Polk, who's the president and commander-in-chief of the Army, is concerned that if Zachary Taylor becomes a war hero, that Zachary Taylor could be a threat to him in the election of 1848 if the war was over by then. Because James K. Polk, who was a dark horse, understood that America loves its war heroes. They've already done that. George Washington, war hero. Andrew Jackson, war hero. William Henry Harrison, war hero. So the first 11 presidents, 3 have been war heroes, and they won elections. So he's just doing the math. We have another war. We have a hero. He could be elected president of the United States. And so what he wants to do is he wants to put the spotlight on Winfield Scott that you see there, who's putting a force together in New Orleans that will launch from there via the Navy and then land on the coast of Mexico sometime in 1847. And so Polk wants the spotlight to be on him because at this point, Winfield Scott did not have any political aspirations, and Polk saw him as less as a political threat, but saw Zachary Taylor as a political threat. And so he takes troops from Taylor and gives them to Winfield Scott. And so in the end, Zachary Taylor is left with about 5,000 troops under his command in northern Mexico around what is present-day Monterrey. Well, what happens here is, so we're going to go down to Buena Vista and Saltillo. What happens here is that Santa Anna is back in Mexico, and he's looking around. And he sees Zachary Taylor's forces up north in northern Mexico, and he knows that Winfield Scott is putting together a force in New Orleans with the idea of landing on the coast of Mexico at some point. And so he makes a decision. I'll go eliminate the threat up in the north and defeat Zachary Taylor, then come back and then fortify the coast and also fortify the capital, Mexico City. What he was banking on was the city of Veracruz on the coast of Mexico. He saw as an impregnable fortress, and that anybody that tried to lay siege to it, it would take at least a year to reduce Veracruz to ashes or be able to capture it and take it, and that he would have plenty of time to do this. So Santa Anna sets off early in January of 1847, sets off for northern Mexico, for Mexico City, with about 5,000 regular troops. He's going to do the same thing that he did when he came north during the Texas Revolution in 1836. As he goes north through villages, he conscripts men and boys in the villages and says, you're in the Mexican army now. So that by the time Santa Anna reaches Zachary Taylor's forces in northern Mexico at Buena Vista, he has about 15,000 troops. So Zachary Taylor is outnumbered 3-1. Now, keep in mind that 2/3 of this army of Santa Anna's are untrained soldiers. They've been given a gun and a uniform, but still, it's numbers. And Zachary Taylor is going to do something very unusual here to fight Santa Anna. He's going to back himself up into an arroyo, almost like a canyon, and he's going to invite Santa Anna to attack him. Come attack me. Now, I'm trying to paint a picture here video-wise. So, if Santa Anna is coming towards me and I'm Zachary Taylor, what I've done is I've got a line of soldiers here with rifles firing this way. And then up above me on the rim of this arroyo, this canyon, I put artillery. And then on my flanks here, at an angle like this, I put a group of sharpshooters called the Mississippi Rifles. And a sharpshooter is somebody that doesn't miss. And in command of these Mississippi Rifles is future Confederate President Jefferson Davis. Now, by doing this, what you get is you get a triangulation of fire. So you have fire coming from this way, bullets coming from this way, and bullets coming from this way. So you have bullets here, and you get a triangulation of fire, and you get what's called a kill box. And then you add on top of that artillery coming from above and raining shot and shell down onto this here. And Santa Anna takes the bait and attacks into this arroyo on February 23rd, 1847, and it's a massacre. Hundreds, several thousand Mexican soldiers are killed and wounded here. And the numbers will be high as far as death because a lot of them will be left on the field wounded and will die of their wounds or die in the elements because Santa Anna retreats after this debacle. But Santa Anna is going to claim victory. He's going to say, I won, and I bloodied Zachary Taylor's nose, and I won. Now I'm going to go back and defend the capital. And that's not what happened at all. It's a disaster for Santa Anna. But for Zachary Taylor, it makes him a national hero, confirming, well, it's what James K. Polk feared. Because you have the villain, in the story here, you have the villain Santa Anna. Santa Anna double-crossed the United States. You have the villain Santa Anna attacking U.S. forces in northern Mexico with 15,000 to America's 5,000. So it's 3-1. It's 3-1 odds here. And the American, the hero, Zachary Taylor, defeats the villain, Santa Anna, the double crosser. And he even had 3 times as many as that. And Zachary Taylor vaults to the national stage as the hero of Buena Vista and Saltillo, and becomes one of the big heroes of the war with Mexico. Meantime, Winfield Scott set sail in March of 1847, shortly after this battle, set sail for Veracruz. And you'll see Veracruz's engineers. And in March of 1847, Winfield Scott will land on the coast of Mexico. And for the first time in the history of the United States, the U.S. military executes an amphibious landing. Now, I'm sure from your biology, you know what an amphibian is. It's like a frog. It can go from water to land or land to water. But in this case, U.S. troops and Marines are going to take boats from U.S. ships and land on the beaches of Mexico at Veracruz. Now, again, this is just a month after Santa Anna's defeat at Buena Vista. But Santa Anna's not terribly concerned because, remember, I told you, he thought that it would take a year to reduce the city of Veracruz. And you're going to have a young captain here. You see Veracruz's engineers, young major of engineers, is going to set up a ring of artillery around us and in just 24 hours force the city of Veracruz to surrender through the strategic placement of artillery that reduced Veracruz. And this young officer's name is Robert E. Lee. He'll go on 15 years later to command the Army of Northern Virginia in the American Civil War. But he was a genius of tactics and war. And again, he was an engineer coming out of West Point. But Veracruz surrenders. And so now Santa Anna has a problem. He was counting on Veracruz holding out for at least a year while he could muster and put together the defenses of Mexico City. Now, the next thing you see there is a student of history. Geography comes into play here. Veracruz sits here at sea level. Mexico City sits at almost 9,000 feet sea level, and the mountains of the Sierra Madre Oriental blocked away. So you have Mexico City up here at 9,500 feet, and it's almost 9,000 feet, and you have Veracruz down here. And so for the American Army, it's going to have to go from sea level and climb, make an arduous climb up into the Sierra Madre Oriental where Mexico City sits. Now, if you remember, Mexico City sits on the site of the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. And if you remember, in 1519, somebody landed at Veracruz, somebody sunk their ships, and 600 Spanish soldiers, along with a hell of Indians, made their way from the coast all the way up to the Aztec capital. Who was that guy? Can anybody remember? If you guessed Hernan Cortez, you're correct. And what Cortez did, of course, he writes a big, nice memoir after this battle. He's the conqueror of the Aztecs. And in his memoir, he details the route that he took from Veracruz up to Mexico City. So Winfield Scott looks around and says, I don't have to reinvent history. Somebody a little over 300 years earlier did this. And so he goes to Cortez memoirs and follows the route of Cortez up to Mexico City. And they're going to enter Mexico City in early September of 1847. But the capture of Mexico City is going to culminate with what you see there, Chapultepec Castle, September 13th, 1847. If you were to go to Mexico City today, there's a central park in Mexico City with a castle sitting high up on a hill overlooking this park. That is Chapultepec Castle. And it was a very formidable fortress to take because they had the high ground. And you feature Civil War generals, Ulysses S. Grant, James Longstreet, George Pickett, Phil Sheridan. A lot of these guys are going to be rise to the rank of general in the American Civil War, participate in the war with Mexico. And in taking this castle, it's vigorously defended. And the American attackers looked at this and said, they saved their best defenders for last. But when they finally take the castle, it's defended by 15 and 16-year-old cadets. It was a military academy. And the commanders of the academy told these cadets, you hold out at all costs. And they did. They gave their lives in defense of this castle. The American attackers were so impressed with the bravery and the courage of these young military cadets that they built a memorial there. And it's still there to this day. On September 13th, 1947, on the 100th anniversary, President Truman went to Mexico City and laid a wreath at this memorial that had been built 100 years earlier by the Americans, honoring the courage and the defense of Chapultepec Castle. But with the fall of Chapultepec Castle, Mexico City falls. Mexico has to surrender, and for the first time in the history of the United States, the American Army has marched into a foreign capital and defeated what was a world power. And Mexico was a top 5 world power at that time in the 19th century. And this really elevates the United States in the eyes of the world. That we're a very young country. We were only 70-something years old at this time. And people said, look, they've come a long way, and they've come very fast in just 7 years from a colony that revolted against them to now a formidable force. So Mexico, the government of Mexico, Santa Anna's kicked back out, and the provisional government of Mexico begrudgingly has to come to the negotiating table. So they surrender in September of 1847, but a treaty won't be done until February of 1848. And that's what you see there, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which will end the war with Mexico. But there are some provisions on there that you need to know. Right? So know these points, what this treaty did. Number one, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo recognized the Rio Grande as the border between Mexico and the United States. So that this dispute that had been going on for a little over 10 years of the Nueces River versus the Rio Grande is now over. That Mexico has recognized this. Mexico will cede or give this territory that the United States had wanted. Remember, before the war, Polk had offered $30 million for this territory. But now that we won, Mexico cedes the territory to us, to the victor go the spoils. But in return, what the United States does, that's point 2, Mexico cedes this territory. Point 3, the United States, instead of just taking the land, pays Mexico $15 million for this land. Now, keep in mind, it's only half of what they offered a couple of years earlier, but the United States could have taken it had they wanted to, because they're the victors' spoils. But they want good neighbors with Mexico. So the United States pays $15 million to Mexico for ceding this land. And then point 4, the United States understood that there would be people that are living in this territory that are Mexican nationals that had land there, and they may not want to stay in what is now going to be the United States. The United States said if they want to stay, they're welcome to stay, and that the deeds and the titles to the lands and the ranches and the homes would the United States recognize those as their legitimate property. However, if they didn't want to stay in this new United States, the United States would pay them fair market value for their home, and the United States would pay them, and they could sell their land to the United States government. They could go live in Mexico if they wanted to. And there were a lot that took them up on the offer. So in the end, the United States spent an additional $3.2 million paying people for the land that was theirs because they didn't want to live in the United States. And so in the end, it was a little over $18 million that the United States paid to government and Mexican citizens that did want to remain in the United States. And now in 1848, the United States has achieved manifest destiny. And so less than half a century from when the idea of manifest destiny came about, the United States is now a coast-to-coast nation. It's been a very, very fast ride. And then one more thing on this. Again, a lot of heavy professors at liberal colleges will sit there and say the United States stole this land from Mexico. But go back to the origins of it. What started this war? A border dispute when Mexico tried to change its mind, saying that the border was the Nueces River and not the Rio Grande. And if you go back and look at that map and look at that little strip of land between the Nueces and the Rio Grande, what that cost Mexico, that cost them the southwestern United States. It'd be interesting to see what would happen in our nation's history had this border dispute not been there. What would the United States look like today? But over a little border dispute that started 184 years ago today, April 22nd, when Santa Anna signed off on the Rio Grande after losing San Jacinto, how it changed history. So with that, we're done with the packet. Remember, Zoom time tomorrow, Thursday, April 23rd at 2 p.m. And again, if you have questions or you want to review, I'll be there for that time. And then we'll be testing on Friday. So, and that will finish this packet, and we'll move on after this. So I hope all is well with all of you. Have a great day and a blessed day. Blessings on you and your family. And give God the glory and the thanks, because we are a blessed nation. And with that, I'll sign off and say adios. How about that?